really excited to have you here, Collin. And you've actually played quite an influential role in my journey as an SDR because I've been following you as a thought leader in the sales space since I very first joined Predictable Revenue. And so it's really a pleasure to get to speak to you live today. For those of you guys who are joining us on the YouTube, if you don't know, Collin Cadmus is the founder at Collin Cadmus LLC. He is a lifelong salesperson and has spent 8 years building and leading high velocity SaaS sales teams. He shares daily sales and leadership tips on LinkedIn, which is, of course, where I found him originally and the kind of beginning of the value that I got from Collin. And he is known for his tendency to talk straight through the BS. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you today, Collin, about how to prospect through 2021 and beyond.
Likewise. Yeah. Well, thanks so much
for
having me. Hopefully everyone's in here. It's always strange speaking when I can't see the audience. So I just hope that everyone can hear me. And if they can't, that they'll let you know.
But thanks so much for
Great. And thank you for the intro. I think I'll probably be speaking for about 30 minutes, but if I end early, we'll take some questions in here. If not, I'll be in the Slack afterwards. Great intro. A quick summary of me. So I spent the last 10 years in sales leadership, building and scaling SaaS sales teams. Started in 2012 at a company called Single Platform. I had spent 4 years prior to that working for CVS as a retail manager and wasn't super happy, didn't really love my job. And anyway, started from scratch and got into SaaS and really found something that I was great at and something that I loved and enjoyed doing. Since then, I've hired about 300 salespeople. We've done over 50 million in recurring revenue and about 300 million in acquisitions, just to give you a sense of my background. And when COVID started, I left my company and started advising, consulting, started a podcast. And what leads us here today is interesting because when you guys asked me to speak, it was a given for me what topic I would speak on, which is the broken SDR model, modern prospecting. And as I was putting together my outline for this, I realized the first time that I spoke publicly about the SDR model being broken or really about anything related to this was with Aaron. It was about 2 years ago on the Predictable Revenue podcast. And I dove into this topic saying the SDR model is broken. And it was an interesting topic to speak about with Aaron because he wrote Predictable Revenue, right? He literally wrote the playbook that everyone's following today. And so I'll do a quick recap of what we spoke about then. But if you didn't see it, you can go back and watch the full episode. And then I'm going to dive into how that led me down the path of what we're going to talk about today. And so about 2 years ago, it's when I started to notice that the SDR process was just not working really the way that it originally did, 10 plus years ago when Aaron wrote this book. And we discussed the implementation or the rollout really of a lot of different automation technologies, Salesloft, whatnot, outreach, right? And what this did is it kind of took this brilliant process that Aaron created and it helped people automate a lot of it. And what I'm seeing today, and we've seen this just continue over the last 3 years, really probably 3+ years, quota attainments are down, right? People are having lower success rates on emails, phone calls, all of these sorts of things. And why is everything declining? Well, when something good comes along and people start doing more of it, it's no longer as good because it's not as interesting. It's not as new. And so the more technology you build around trying to automate a process and help people to execute that process faster, now you have more of that process being done every single day at the same time while it's spreading around to a lot more sales teams. And so the effectiveness of a lot of the prospecting tactics that people have been using over the last 5, maybe even 10 years have started to decline. And so we have things like technology that's blocking your cold calls, right? Things that's blocking your cold emails. I'm calling them spam because half of them actually are. And we'll dive into that. And so that's high level what we talked about on that episode. And since then, particularly as I've started consulting and working with other companies, I've been focused on how do we fix this problem? What can we do about it? Most importantly, what can I do about it? Because I realized I spent a lot of time ranting and complaining about it, particularly on that podcast, but I want to do something to change it. And I got really frustrated with the volume of emails and messages that I'll receive on LinkedIn, in my inbox, whatever. And it just seems that all these salespeople, majority of them are very misguided. They are very frequently dropping a pitch along with a scheduling link. They're literally trying to complete almost half the sales process in one cold message. And it's insane. This is spam and people are sensitive to it. And I believe high level that if we keep abusing the privilege and the right to reach out to people cold, it's only going to get harder to do. And they're going to do a better job at blocking us. And we've already seen that happen. You turn on your phone now and you can literally shut off calls from unknown numbers. You can just turn them off. That's really bad for us, right? And if we keep doubling down on automating and trying to just solve the problem with more volume, the problem really just gets worse. And we're going to be stuck in a place where we're really not going to be able to cold prospect someday. I think that. And so I decided to put together a course, and the idea of this course, and we're going to go through high level some of the topics here today, but it's way too much to fit into one 30-minute session. But the high level, the idea of the course is that we bring together a community around this topic, around modern prospecting. This is the specific topic we'll focus on. I'm creating lectures and modules that will go through everything that we'll talk about today, but in detail. And that will be something that we'll keep adding to it over time. So if you join the course, you're in it for life, and then you get to stay up to date on this type of stuff, and we can collaborate, work together as a community to help to continue to try to stay ahead of the curve, rather than continuing to just double down on things that we know are having declining performance. So what is the problem, right? The problem is essentially that sales automation technology has kind of turned prospecting into marketing. Now, I'll say that again, right? Sales automation technology has turned prospecting into marketing. If you have a team of 50 SDRs that are researching data and loading it, into templates and putting in a little merge field that they snipped out of someone's LinkedIn, that's not really personalization, right? You're really just putting merge fields into a mass marketing message that a marketing team could do for a fraction of the dollar. And so that makes me nervous when I start to see that we've gotten so far into automation that we've actually moved so far away from actually being humans. And that's where I think that we're going wrong. And so sort of the agenda here is with this course is to help us get back to finding the right balance between human and automation. I'm not saying get rid of automation. I'm not preaching that. But we're using it wrong, and we're using too much of it, and we've removed the human. And that's where I think that we have opportunity in this year and beyond. And we've tested a lot of these theories and they work. So that's what we'll dive into. Okay, let's see. So you probably say at this point, I covered a little bit, but your process works, right? You might be saying to me, but Collin, I don't know, I would sign up for this course, start some whole new thing, but things are working, right? Maybe the results are declining a little bit, and it's very slow over time, that decline. And that's why I'm worried about it. I'm trying to look at the big picture, but hey, do I really want to tear apart everything that I'm doing today and try to make some big change? And so I thought a lot about that as I put this together. And what I came up with is that I want to do something that's supplementary to what you're already doing. In order for people to adopt a change, I think we can't change everything all at once. And if I said, go rip out your whole process today, our revenue would stop for 6 months while we test and figure things out, right? It would be messy. And so you never want to do that. And so what I've put together, and I'm still working on putting together, but we'll overview today, is a program that you can take, let's say 10 to 20% of your top accounts. Okay, call them your key accounts. And you can remove them from, or not remove them, but you can delay putting them into your regular process and put them through this for 30 to 90 days prior to doing your regular outreach, whatever you would normally do. And the idea here is to try to humanize the prospects, warm them up, and get them to become a little bit familiar with you. And we'll walk through ultimately what that looks like today. So I've broken this down really into 3 parts. So the goal here is we want to, 1, create awareness. Okay. Number 2, we want to generate engagement. And number 3, we want to align on a problem. So I'll say that again. All right. Modern prospecting is creating awareness, generating engagement, and aligning on a problem, all before you do a cold outreach or suggest a meeting or a demo. Now imagine that, right? Someone gets an email from a random person, a company they've never heard of before, saying, hey, my company does X, Y, and Z. I'd love to tell you about it. Click this link and I'll take 30 to 40 minutes of your time. Right? Versus someone who maybe you've kind of seen them around on social media. You've had a couple interactions, perhaps in some comments. Maybe there was a DM where you went kind of off, into private land to talk about something that you were talking about on social, right? These different types of things can actually start to warm up prospects so that when you do reach out to them, A, it's not a cold message. B, you don't even have to pitch them because you're already into a topic. You're already into a conversation that maybe has nothing to do with what you're selling. And that's even better way to start talking to them because their guard's down and you're not a salesperson. You're not just someone talking to them. So, excuse me. Those are the 3 things that we'll dive into here. So we want to create awareness, generate engagement, and align on a problem, all before attempting to schedule a meeting. And again, if you're in an SMB environment, you're probably going to want to do this with your top 10% accounts, right? You have too many accounts. If you're in an enterprise environment, you may want to do this with all of your accounts. You may have enough time. The list may be small enough. So that stuff is going to be up to you to figure out how to manage that time management process. Ideally, you're putting as many of your accounts as possible through something like this, rather than just dumping them into what I'm referring to as essentially your marketing campaign that you're running. Okay, so let's talk about creating awareness. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, the lowest hanging fruit in this entire program is social media. So first and foremost, when you're thinking about this, when you're looking for prospects and you're creating those lists, you really want to be trying to look for people or companies who are active on social. It's going to make this all light years easier and light years less expensive. Okay. There are ways that we can do it without social. I'm not going to cover a lot of them today because they're not going to be as common and they're definitely more expensive, but we'll cover some of that stuff in courses as well, because not everyone's on social. Right. And I get that, but just a little note there, something to think about that if your direct contact isn't on social, that doesn't mean that someone else in the company isn't. Doesn't mean you can't potentially use this process and look for a different entry point into that company. Okay, so those are things to consider as well. All right, so we want to create awareness. So what I've always liked to do, if you have the resources here, I highly suggest partner with your marketing team on this initiative. This is something that you're going to be able to do so much more effectively if you have those resources. If not, that's okay. You can do it yourself. But if you have a marketing team and you're going to do this, you should really work together on it. If you're not, you're just wasting those resources. And so creating awareness is what it's doing is it's allowing you to subconsciously remove the fact that they have no idea who you are or why you're reaching out, right? And you become familiar. And so, every brand in the world that we know today, they spend millions of dollars on awareness, right? Coca-Cola, McDonald's, all of these companies, and we know of them just because we've seen them every day, all the time, right? And they want to stay relevant. They want to stay top of mind. So when it comes to marketing, sales, awareness is the number one first thing you really want to worry about, okay? People need to be aware of you. Look at companies like Predictable Revenue, Gong, Salesforce, right? Who have done such an incredible job. There's no one on Gong's team, I would imagine, that's very often reaching out to someone who doesn't know who they are. And that makes their job a lot easier, right? Now, you could say, well, Gong has this incredible marketing team. Okay, that's an excuse, okay? Because there's things that we can do on our own. And so try to partner with marketing if you have it. It doesn't need to be a big budget, but if you have those resources, that's good. I'll give you a quick example of something we did in my last company to create awareness. And so this was pre-COVID, so people were still commuting to the office, and we had this idea to target a certain amount of accounts. We were essentially testing the waters on a lot of these theories here, partnered with marketing. And what we did was we mapped out these accounts actually on a physical map. And we said, we're going to do New York City. We're going to focus on all accounts here in New York City that we want to go after. And we're going to find where their offices are located. And then we're going to look at the subway maps and we're going to see what their commute to work is. And the beauty of New York City, or really anyway, for driving, same thing, California, you get the billboards, right? But New York, you have everyone riding on the subways and there's advertisements all over the place. And we said subway ads would be great. If you live in New York, you know how cool they are. If you see your brand in the subway, that's a lot of fun, but they're too expensive. And so we didn't do it. But we found out there's phone booths outside of the subway stations and no one really uses them anymore. So the ads on them were very, very cheap. And we're also selling a phone system. So it kind of made a lot of sense. So what we did is we covered every single phone booth with our ads that were located directly outside of the stops near all of these prospects' offices, so that when they were going to work for the next 30, or I think we did it for 60 days, they were probably going to see our brand and some messaging. And this was subconscious. We weren't expecting them to take action on this. We weren't expecting them to go to the website. Of course, you had a link and stuff on there, but it was really just to create some brand awareness. Now, finance folks out there might be saying, Collin, how do you test all this stuff? You don't. So if you're asking for me to tell you how you're going to prove all this works, you can't get that specific. At the end of the day, you can see what your sales are, right? You can see what your pipeline looks like after doing something like this and get a sense. But not all of this is going to be super measurable when you start to get into things like awareness, because it is so subconscious, right? McDonald's doesn't know how many of their commercials got you to buy that McChicken. They just know they spent X and they earned Y. Right. And if those numbers work out, they're like, okay, we're probably doing something right. So you want to get creative here, right? So that's an example of getting creative and thinking outside of the box. We were not using social media there, right? It doesn't mean that we couldn't have, but this was an idea that we had and it fit within our budget. So we did it. So after you create awareness, again, that's just one example. We're going to go through in this course. There's going to be an ever building list of these types of ideas. We'll reach to the community as well to find more of them, right? So let's talk about generating engagement. So first, you're creating awareness. You just want them to be familiar with your brand. And it doesn't have to be your company brand. It could be you, right? It could be the Collin Cadmus brand or whoever you are, right? Ideally, they're familiar with both. That's even better. Okay. But after you've gotten to that point, and that might take 30 days, it might take 60 days to do that. You may also not know, did it work? Are they aware? Are they ready? And you have to kind of test out the timing of all these things until you're getting results that you like. But after that, we want to start to generate some engagement. So we've created some awareness. The objective now is to just figure out a way to get them to react to something, whether it's something as blatant as, asking them a question in a comment, or something where you're maybe posting on a topic that they posted about passionately recently, and you're tagging them in it because you saw their post and you want to ask them about it, right? Little things like that, right? So try to create that engagement and try to have some sort of interaction with them, because this just sort of takes that subconscious rapport to the next level. Now you've actually had some sort of back and forth. And what that does is it opens the door. Now the door is potentially open. Again, I'm not saying it's going to work every single time, right? But if you can get this to work on a handful of your top accounts each quarter, it can make a big difference. And it allows you to stop driving people crazy, your top accounts. It allows you to take a humanized approach before you put them into your non-human, non-personalized automation, right? That we all say is personalized, but we know it's not. If we knew it was personalized, I asked you, who are the last 10 people you emailed in SalesLoft? You don't know, because it happened on its own, because you're not doing it personally, right? And so we can't fake personal. We faked it for a little while, but people know what's going on now. So we just can't get away with that as easily anymore. And look, if we just back up, like my thought process here was, let's just back up and not try to overthink it. And maybe if we stop trying to think how to game the system, we actually just think about how to do things the right way and take our time, it works, right? And it actually works. You may have seen Jason Lemkin on my last podcast. I did a season there, and I used this tactic to get him on the podcast. I had reached out to him cold a couple times a long time ago to try to set up some sort of event. No answer, no answer, no answer. Busy guy, right? I finally took this approach. So let me start engaging with this guy. He's posting so much content. And I engaged in everything that I saw. And eventually he reshared one of my posts. And I'm like, wow, there is the engagement. I created the awareness. I generated the engagement. And then when I was finally ready to launch a podcast, I was able to reach out to him, and it wasn't a cold message. And he said, yes, let's do it. That was it. That was all he had to say. And it happened in one night, right? And so it's not a sale, but it's the same type of thing. It's still prospecting, and it's still reaching out to someone where you're asking for their time. You're asking for something from them. You have to try to make that more organic. If you're just being as cold as you are with it, the results aren't going to get any better. And like I said earlier, they will continue to get worse. If you don't think so, just think about how passionate people are about blocking spam, that don't like it. I got pitched a product the other day that's actually going to go into your inbox and tell people who are not in your contact list that if you want to get into your inbox, you can make a $20 or $100 donation to my charity of choice, right? There's things like this coming up everywhere, and they're good products because people don't want the spam. So as salespeople, we can just continue to double down on it and say, our results are down. We need to send 20% more emails next week. That's how we're going to solve the problem. No, that's how you're going to delay the problem. Okay. Solve the problem by taking a step back. Say, hey, we're going to take 10 to 20% of our accounts, the best ones, and we're going to take our time on them. And if we have to lower our forecast for the next quarter while we make this adjustment, we're going to do that, because net, what we're doing today is not sustainable, and it's not going to last forever. Okay. So now you've created some engagement. Ideally, you've had some sort of interaction with them. Again, not going to work on everyone, right? It's just like making 100 cold calls. Like, they don't all work. The idea is that enough of them work. So once you've gotten to that point, you've now created some awareness. You may be 90 days into this by now, maybe 60 days, maybe 30. Okay. You've created some awareness. You've had some sort of engagement. It doesn't really matter what it was, but there was some sort of an acknowledge, even if they just liked your comment, something silly, but there's something there. You now have an open door to make some contact with them, right? Off the comment section or something, right? So now is where you really want to try to make that contact. But, and I'm going to be very clear here, this is not where you're trying to schedule a meeting. This is where you still have to get that out of your head. Your objective here And you kind of want to change your mindset on prospecting entirely and just stop thinking about your mission to schedule meetings and start thinking about your mission to find people who acknowledge they have a problem that you can solve. Think about that. If I'm just calling anyone, just trying to book a meeting, am I really trying to help people? How could I be? I don't know they have a problem, right? It's like I have a cure for cancer that's better than chemo. Great, but not great if I just go around injecting in everyone without knowing if they have cancer, right? So it's essentially what salespeople are doing today with this mass marketing and all of this, schedule a meeting with me before I even ask 2 questions about you or about your situation. So make your first objective, or really your only objective, to find people who align on a problem, okay? And you can ask them how they're currently handling X, Y, and Z, or you can ask them if they've ever had an issue with this, or you could tell them that you're having a problem with this, or someone is, and ask for their feedback on it, things like that, right? And find alignment on a problem. Then and only then does it make sense to schedule a meeting. And in most cases, if you do this right, the meeting's kind of scheduled itself. It's just a matter of picking the date and time, right? At that point, if they've aligned on a problem, you could potentially solve it. You've built rapport, you've generated awareness, all of these things. At this point, it's just kind of a no-brainer to sit with you and maybe hear out what you have to say about that problem. And so that's the concept, right? Create that awareness, generate that engagement, align on a problem, and then let things happen organically. Just let those meetings book themselves. All right. So that's the summary, essentially, right? It's creating that awareness, generating that engagement. And then when these steps are created properly, right, that's where the guard's going to come down. And that's the secret sauce here, because when you're jumping into someone's inbox cold, the guard is up. They know you're selling. The chances of getting through that guard nowadays, it's just so much smaller than it ever has been. And so we have to do things to warm that type of stuff up. And so another piece that I'll throw in here, because I think we've got some time, I'm going to also be looking into different tools. So in this course, we'll also talk about different tools, and we'll do reviews of things that come to the market so that you can stay up to date on that type of stuff. It's constantly changing. The first one we'll be talking about is co-sell. I have recently partnered with cosell.io. If you haven't checked them out, it's going to be game changing. I'm so excited at the timing of being able to just include this in this, because they've literally built a platform. Just imagine, right? Imagine you could connect your Salesforce or your CRM to a third-party platform, and all of the salespeople in the world can do that as well. And we can see our overlaps. And I have 20 accounts that I'm trying to get in touch with. But meanwhile, Julia at Predictable Revenue has already a relationship with one of them, and they're a customer. And I have a relationship with Julia. So maybe we can now talk and figure out a way to have the best of both worlds. And I can get some sort of an introduction. Perhaps I can return the favor to her. And all of a sudden, salespeople at different companies start working together, hence the name co-sell, right? So that plays perfectly into everything I'm trying to do here, right? Because it's allowing you to get your foot in the door without having to spam people, okay? And again, it doesn't mean I'm against cold outreach. I'm an advocate of it. I've done it my whole career. But you can't be irresponsible with it. And that's what I feel it's turned to with this automation, is we just have essentially no respect for people's inboxes. But then we're asking them to give us respect and show us 30 minutes of their time and buy something and hear us out. It's very hypocritical. It's very contradictory. And I think that we can make a dent in the problem by humanizing the process, at least for your 10 to 20, top accounts, or 10 to 20% of your top accounts. That is it. If we have some time, I'm happy to take some questions here.
Absolutely. Very interesting. Yeah. I love that, the idea of that approach as well, making it manageable. As you said, it's not this total shift that everyone has to stop, drop what they're doing and change entirely. It's totally manageable. This is something that every rep listening now, or every manager, every sales leader can implement tomorrow, and it have no impact. As you're saying, if what you're doing is working, don't stop. Fine. Keep the meetings coming in, keep the revenue coming in that way, but start to make this shift, because eventually, and probably sooner than what we think, it's not going to work. Like, it might be working, but it won't. So yeah. Really,
and look at your numbers, right? Because I think there's probably some sales orgs on this call even who are maybe not having any problems, and perhaps their metrics have not declined over the last few years. But I urge you to look at that trend over the course of years, because you may not notice it month over month over month, right? But when you go back and you say, wow, 5 years ago, our connect rate, right? And then you start to make those forecasts of what that does to you 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But the problem is your financial models are not taking any of that into account. So if we're band-aiding these situations and we're not taking a step back and trying to think, how do we reset here a little bit, right? The industry has just gotten a little bit out of control. And it's just funny in this industry. There's so many thought leaders. There's everyone, has something to say, but it seems like generally we all just follow the same suit. And maybe that's because the thought leaders are really good. I mean, obviously huge kudos to Aaron, right? And getting, making that initial trend. But I get a little bit scared when we move so fast and we all just follow what other people are doing. Right? My post on LinkedIn today was about CS owning revenue, upsell, and things like that. It's like another trend that everyone just sort of does it. It's not perfect. And very few people ask, why are we doing it this way? And so hopefully today we can stir up some minds and get some people thinking about the long-term picture here.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, please pop your questions in the chat if you have them so that we can get them answered. I do have a question though, Collin.
Sure.
So when you've gotten through the awareness phase, you've gotten through your engagement phase, you're having that one-to-one conversation with this person. As you mentioned, you kind of chat about aligning on a pain first, and then you can position yourself as a potential solution to that pain. How do you... I would be afraid of doing the like bait and switch. If I say like, how are you solving this problem today? Or like, oh, a colleague of mine is having this issue, or someone I know is having this issue. And then they agree that there's an issue. How do you then pivot that to be like, well, I can solve it without being,
Yeah. So maybe I said that a little bit wrong when I used that one example, but you don't want to bait and switch. That's definitely not the intent. The intent is to have conversations just come up a little bit more organically, right? At the end of the day, they may realize that you sell something or whatnot, but just the mere fact that like you have a natural way of engaging with them prior to having that discussion, it makes an enormous difference. People still know you're an account executive at whatever, right? But the fact that and think about it this way, because when I just went over this all in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, but in real life, when this is playing out, this engagement, this interaction is happening over the course of 30 to 90 days. So that feels a lot different, right? It's a lot different when we've interacted over social media, because I don't remember every little interaction we had. I just recognize you. I just know we've had those interactions. You just feel familiar to me. And that's very, very, very different. And that's why I said it doesn't feel like a bait and switch. Of course, if you're playing it that way and you're lying to people, sure, it would come off that way. That's not the intent at all. The intent is to just let conversations come organically. And when you're talking to a friend, they're more than happy to tell you about their problems, right? Because they're a little bit less nervous about just being pitched something. And then there's a different, I think, psychological element to someone telling you about their problems before you pitch them versus after. It's a huge difference because you're actually taking the time to ask. And if you care enough to ask, I think that sends the message that I'm not going to shove something down your throat if you don't need it or want it, right? I'm actually asking first. And that's the difference. There's nothing more insulting, I think, than putting a message in someone's inbox, assuming they have a problem and assuming they recognize that problem and then proposing a solution. I've had people reach out to me while I'm building my business. When my first website went up, for example, it was terrible, right? It was super ugly. And I knew that. And I was working hard in the background to rebuild it. And I had a handful of people reach out to me and essentially not really intending to, but insulting the website, telling me all the things that are wrong with it, but here's the problem. I already knew all of those things. I was already working on all of them. So that outreach is really ineffective. And if they had started by just creating a conversation about my website or how I'm building it, that would be something I'd be open to chatting about, right? And maybe I could learn something from them in the process, and they could offer some free value. And then we're in a conversation. And then maybe if I do need some help, I remember that person and I reach back out. And that's organic selling, right? That's modern selling. So that's what we're going for here. And we're just up on time too.
Perfect. Yeah. That totally makes sense. So any of you guys that have questions, please pop them into the Slack community. But if you'd like, we can answer them right now. We have a break scheduled, so we can always go a couple minutes into this break. If we have any questions, please pop them in. Otherwise, of course, you can ask Collin in our Slack community as well. Very, very interesting. And it makes sense when you explain it that way, that it's not a bait and switch, because you have, again, aligned on the fact that there is this pain, and you're saying like, hey, I potentially have a solution for that. Can I share it with you? And that's why you're saying it still might not work 100% of the time, because people still might just be like, you know what? No. And like, that is fine. But the fact is that you're engagement rate or your positive sort of response rate, if you're looking at it that way, is going to be so much higher because of the relationship that already exists. And
Yeah.
there's a bit of trust that has been built
And
because
it's
they see you as more of
subconscious
like a
too. That's
partner
the
or
thing.
yeah.
It's mostly subconscious, right? Like I always use this analogy and it's just weird. I'm like, how am I presenting this as a unique idea? Because to me, this is just like psychology 101. You just can't get married you can't walk before you crawl or any of that stuff, right? And dating is the same thing. And I use this analogy and people are like, oh my God, you're right. Like maybe the analogy that sales is turning into marketing is not as good as like, if I go to the bar I see someone I'm attracted to and I just go up and get on my knee with a wedding ring. Like that's almost the equivalent of sending this calendar link, like asking for time on an executive's calendar. Like they don't know you. They have no reason to talk to you. You think they do. You have a reason to talk to them. But it's so narcissistic to be sending these things out, thinking that people just want to have these meetings. And they do it because it works a small percentage of the time. But if you just back up and treat people like humans and think, okay, I need to get into this person's world first. I need to become someone that they kind of recognize and find ways to do that. I just threw out a few small examples today, but this is just human 101. And when we try to automate and we take the human out, we have a problem. And so that's what I see happening. I see the problem snowballing. It's a slow build, but yeah, it's not headed in a good direction. And the fact that I see Verizon launching literally default features to block things. I mean, it's us doing it. It's us. It's also, oversees the robocalls and stuff, but like it's largely us. So that's it.
Interesting thing about the wedding analogy too, is that not only do you not know if that person wants to marry you, but you also don't know if you want to marry them yet. Like you don't actually know if this company is a fit at all. And it goes back to your other analogy about the better than chemo cancer jab. Like if you're just trying to give it to everybody, you're wasting so much time, so many resources. How about find people who have cancer, who really need it, give it to them, and everyone will be really happy with you, and your reputation will precede you, and everyone will be so much happier and better off.
Think about what you just said there. If we were living in a world where salespeople were first trying to identify the right prospects, people who have the problems, and those are the only people that were annoying, right? That's a much better environment than just annoying everyone. It's significantly different, but we're trying to take shortcuts. We're saying, I don't want to take the time to get to know my prospects. I don't want to take the time to figure out if they have a problem. I just want to load 300 of them into my machine and let it do the work for me. It's lazy. It's not sales. It's marketing and it's spam.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, perfect place to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Collin, for joining us.
Thanks everyone for listening to it. Just before we go, if anyone wants to sign up for the wait list, just go to collincadmus.com. You can add your name at the bottom of the page.
Perfect. Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great. It sounds like a really great course that you're developing. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of you for watching, of course, this session as well. And reminder that you can have a chat with Collin on the Slack community, and he'll answer any of those questions there. But with that, thank you so much. And I'll bring Collin Stewart back in and we'll let you go, Collin Cadmus.